My name is Scarlett Ann Hayes, and I was 18 the night my parents finally said their quiet truth out loud. The truth I had felt my entire life, but never heard spoken with such elegant cruelty. It happened under the glow of a crystal chandelier that threw fractured light across a mahogany table, polished so smooth it showed every reflection except the ones that mattered. Mother's voice sliced through the comfortable hum of conversation like a scalpel disguised in silk. $95,000 for Victoria's studies in London, she announced, raising her champagne flute toward my older sister. Oxford deserves nothing less than perfection. Everything paused. The clinking of silverware, the soft murmur of aunts and uncles, even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed to hesitate, as if the whole room was listening for my reaction. But no one looked at me. They never did. Victoria beamed under the chandelier's glow, her honey blonde waves catching the light in a way that made her look almost angelic. She had practiced her British accent for weeks, sprinkling casual, brilliant, and lovely into conversations like she already belonged in some ivy-kissed courtyard overseas. I watched her sip sparkling cider and pretend it was champagne. I watched the pride radiating from our parents like a heat lamp. And I felt my fork go still in my hand. The prime rib on my bone china plate cooled untouched. The smell of rosemary and butter used to comfort me, but tonight it layered itself over the perfume of expensive candles and the manufactured warmth of family celebration until the air felt thick, swollen, hard to breathe. Every compliment to Victoria landed with the precision of a well-rehearsed choir. Every smile aimed at her never flickered my way. I tried to swallow the ache in my throat, the familiar one that rose any time my sister was praised for existing while I had to bleed for scraps. But tonight I made the mistake of speaking. The words came out quieter than I intended, soft enough to be mistaken for an intrusive thought. What about me? Silence smothered the table. Victoria's practiced accent slipped. Aunt Constance blinked, as though she'd forgotten I was seated between her and the floral centerpiece. Slowly, Mother's eyes drifted across the table and met mine. If eyes could bruise, hers would have left marks. She didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't pretend. You don't deserve any help, Scarlett. A familiar kind of silence pressed down on my chest. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something suffocating, something old, something sharpened by years of being compared, dismissed, minimized, and told to be practical. Even Victoria stopped smiling. Father cleared his throat, but not to defend me. He only lifted his glass, swirling the wine, already finished with the conversation that had carved open a hole in my chest. We invest where we see returns, he said, as though discussing stocks instead of daughters. Victoria has proven potential. You made your choices. Made my choices. As if I had ever been given any. The chandelier hummed faintly. Knives scraped against china. Vanilla-scented candles flickered with the draft of unspoken judgment. Somewhere inside me, something went still, not broken, not shattered. Still. Like the exact moment before a wildfire takes its first breath. I forced myself to breathe, to unclench my jaw, to lift my chin. I understand, I said. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was a door closing. No one acknowledged my words. No one asked what I meant. No one worried about the girl who suddenly looked like she'd aged 10 years in a single heartbeat. The moment folded neatly into the evening, catalogued alongside every childhood birthday spent watching Victoria blow out candles, every family photo where I stood half hidden behind someone taller, every school achievement dismissed because Victoria had already done it better. But this moment, this one, branded itself into me like fire drawn into wet wood. When I stood, my chair scraped the hardwood floor with a sound sharp enough to make Uncle Richard flinch. "Where are you going?" Mother asked, annoyed rather than concerned. "Home," I said. "You are home," she corrected. I didn't bother arguing. You can't explain absence to people who never noticed you were there. Outside, the Connecticut air hit me like a gulp of cold water. Rain had started, not heavy, but insistent. It tapped against my windshield like fingers counting down to the person I was becoming. By the time I reached my dorm, the storm had strengthened. Thunder rolled somewhere deep, heavy, patient, like it had been waiting for me to finally hear it. My phone buzzed the second I tossed it on my bed. Mother, don't be dramatic. You'll regret this attitude. Mother, we love you, but you need to be realistic. Mother, you know Victoria needs this more. I flipped the phone face down on the mattress, let it vibrate until it exhausted itself. My dorm room was barely big enough for a twin bed, a desk, and the radiator that clanked every 11 minutes like it was struggling to breathe. The air smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and my roommate's burnt popcorn. But it was quiet, real quiet. Not the silence of being ignored, the silence of finally choosing myself. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and created a new folder. Life Blueprint. Inside, 3 empty files, income streams, expenses, projects. I didn't know exactly what I was building, only that I had to build something no one could take credit for, something they couldn't call a hobby or a phase or a mistake. That night, I deleted every contact in my phone with my last name. No ceremony, no anger, no tears. Just names sliding into digital oblivion. For the first time in my life, the absence of their voices didn't feel like loss. It felt like oxygen. And somewhere outside, the rain kept falling, steady and relentless. The sound of something ending and something else, something raw and undefinable, just beginning. The first morning after cutting off my family felt strange, not liberating in the way movies promise, not devastating the way therapists describe, just quiet in a way that felt almost artificial, like the air was waiting to see what I would do next. I woke to the familiar metallic clank of the radiator, the thin January sunlight slipping through the blinds in pale strips. My roommate's hairdryer buzzed faintly in the hallway. Somewhere downstairs, a vending machine hummed like a tired engine. Everything felt the same, except me. On my desk, the folder I'd created the night before, Life Blueprint, hovered like a dare. Income streams, expenses, projects. I stared at the blank files until my eyes blurred. Then I started typing. By noon, I'd listed every shift I could pick up at the student cafe, every job on campus that required someone who could fix a router or calm down a panicking freshman. I calculated how much rent I could cover if I stopped buying coffee and learned to love peanut butter sandwiches. By evening, I was working my first extra shift behind the cafe counter, pulling espresso shots for people pulling all-nighters. People who still had parents texting them good luck and proud of you and want me to send money? People who had no idea how fragile their world was. I tried not to resent them. Tried. When the cafe's router crashed during finals week, I fixed it in 7 minutes. The manager paid me $20 under the table and told me I was surprisingly useful. I didn't correct him. Useful was the only kind of praise I had ever learned to trust. That night, I sat under the warm yellow glow of my desk lamp and coded until my fingers cramped, the rain tapping against the window in the same rhythm it had kept the night I drove away from my family. The storm hadn't ended, it had followed me. 3 months passed like a montage played at double speed. Coffee, classes, code, silence. Always silence. When other students went home for holidays, I stayed in my dorm and built small tools. Scripts that auto-organized receipts, algorithms that predicted bus delays, a browser extension that helped scholarship students navigate financial aid forms. They weren't revolutionary, not yet, but they filled my nights, kept me tethered to something that was mine. One afternoon, my inbox pinged with a message from a company I had applied to half-heartedly at 2 a.m. weeks earlier. Tech Forward Solutions. Interview invitation. I reread it 10 times to make sure it wasn't a mistake. People like me didn't usually get jobs like that. People like Victoria did. The office was a new haven, filled with glass walls, standing desks, and the scent of ambition. 15 people shared the space. Most seemed exhausted, over-caffeinated, and exhilarated, like they were sprinting constantly but somehow enjoying it. The CTO, Cameron, was the kind of person who made everything feel possible. Sharp eyes, faster brain, too much coffee. He interviewed me for 43 minutes. At minute 39, he stopped and leaned forward. "You built all this yourself?" he asked, scrolling through my portfolio of half-finished tools. "Yes," I said. "You know this isn't normal, right?" I braced for him to tell me it wasn't good enough. But he smiled. "It's exceptional." Something in my chest tightened so hard it nearly hurt. I got the job. Tech Forward became my second home. The office was loud during the day, printers running, keyboards clacking, debates about user experience erupting every hour. But after midnight, the place belonged to me alone. I tested code beneath the neon glow of the exit sign, the city lights spilling through the windows like quiet spectators. I logged every bug, every fix, every improvement. I documented the process not because anyone asked me to, but because data never lied. Data never punished. Data never compared me to Victoria. Cameron noticed the late nights. One evening, he appeared behind me, arms crossed thoughtfully as he watched lines of code scroll down my screen. "You're optimizing logistics algorithms," he said. Just a side project, I answered. He shook his head. Make it your main one. If it works, we pitch it. My throat tightened. To the partners? To the world, he said simply. And just like that, the side project became something else. Something with shape and weight and possibility. Something I dared to care about. We named it Rootwise. A system designed to help small businesses reduce waste, streamline routes, and cut costs. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't flashy. But it was mine, brick by brick, line by line, choice by choice. And for once, no one told me I didn't deserve it. By the time Rootwise entered its pilot stage, I had become a regular patient at the campus counseling center. My therapist, Dr. Callahan, had the kind of voice that made even painful truths feel survivable. Your parents didn't love you conditionally, she told me one day. They loved the version of you that made their lives easier. That's still conditional, I'd murmured. She nodded. Yes, but now you understand the vocabulary. That gives you power. She taught me words like emotional neglect, scapegoat dynamics, parentification, words I'd never had before, words that finally mapped the shape of the wounds I'd spent years pretending weren't there. I logged our sessions in the same folder where Rootwise lived. Logic and emotion, data and pain, finally sitting beside each other like they belonged. The startup world didn't slow down. I didn't slow down. When the partners decided to spin Rootwise into its own startup, Cameron insisted I become co-founder and CTO. I signed the paperwork in a conference room overlooking the New Haven harbor, the windows streaked with a familiar kind of rain. My hand didn't shake. Not once. I celebrated by microwaving leftover noodles in the office kitchen and updating my life blueprint. It wasn't glamour. It wasn't champagne. It was proof. Proof that I could build something from scraps. Proof that silence could turn into strength. Proof that every moment I'd been dismissed or overshadowed wasn't the end of my story, just the beginning. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and unbothered. The storm hadn't followed me. I had learned how to walk through it. Rootwise didn't explode overnight. It grew the way storms roll in along the coast. Quiet at first, almost invisible, until one day you look up and realize the entire horizon has changed. By the end of my first year at Tech Forward, we'd landed enough small business clients to prove our model. Bakeries, courier services, florists, nonprofits, people trying to survive in an economy that squeezes the smallest hands the hardest. Every data set I cleaned felt personal, like I was untangling the knots that used to choke me. The more Rootwise grew, the more I realized I wasn't just building software. I was building distance. Distance from the girl who used to sit in her family's shadow. Distance from the dinner table where I'd been told I didn't deserve help. Distance from the silence that had once swallowed my voice whole. The office became an ecosystem of late nights, glowing monitors, and scribbled equations on whiteboards stained with old smudges. Cameron trusted me, which felt like a novelty I didn't know how to hold at first. He let me lead meetings, pitch ideas, and make decisions without questioning whether I was being too much or not enough, words Mother used like invisible fences. But the person who changed the rhythm of my days, a new kind of distance, a different kind of quiet, entered my life unexpectedly. His name was Nathan Cole. He wasn't from Tech Forward. He came into the picture because the building next door shared our parking lot. I met him at midnight on a Tuesday, when the sky looked like a dark sheet of velvet and the only light came from the flickering lamppost above the sidewalk. I was leaving the office, exhausted, laptop bag weighing on my shoulder, when he held a door open for me between the two buildings. He smiled, not politely, not performatively, but like he saw something familiar in me. "You're the one who always leaves at ungodly hours," he said. I blinked. "And you don't?" He laughed. "Touché." He introduced himself. Nathan, civil engineer, equally overworked, equally sleep-deprived, equally in love with problems most people never see. Our schedules aligned by accident at least 4 nights a week. Coffee runs turned into shared lunches. Shared lunches turned into dinners eaten on curbs outside our buildings. Dinners turned into walking each other to our cars. And slowly, walking each other to our cars turned into something I hadn't allowed myself to consider for years. Care, attention, interest. Not the performative kind my family doled out like charity, but something warm and unforced. Nathan never asked about my family, not at first. He waited. He let silence stretch without demanding it be filled. He noticed things, the way I flinched when people raised their voices, the way I worked until my eyes burned, the way the word deserve made me stiffen like ice forming underwater. One night, sitting on the hood of his car with takeout boxes between us, he asked, "Who hurt you that badly?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, but he didn't push. He just said, "You don't have to tell me, but I hope someday you let yourself be on your own team." No one had said anything like that to me in years, maybe ever. Rootwise kept growing. We pitched bigger clients. We expanded features. We optimized new industries. And when a venture capital firm decided to back us, it felt like stepping into a world I had watched from outside glass windows my whole life, like touching something I had been told was unreachable. Success, when it arrived, didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like steadiness. Eventually, with the company strong enough to run without me for a few hours a day, Cameron and the partners insisted I take some time off. "Burnout isn't heroic," he'd said. Nathan insisted too, in his quiet, gentle way. One evening, he took my hands, thumbs brushing the places where my skin always dried from typing. "You're allowed to rest," he murmured. Allowed. A strange word, an unfamiliar permission. But I took it, and I decided to make a purchase I had never dreamed possible, not because I needed space, but because I had finally earned the right to choose the kind of life I wanted to live. I found the listing by accident, a waterfront estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, a house of glass and limestone facing Long Island Sound. $10 million, a number that once belonged to another universe entirely. The real estate agent greeted me like she'd expected someone older, wealthier, more polished. But she adapted quickly when I spoke with the confidence I had built from scratch. The house was empty the first time I walked through it. Sunlight fell across the marble floors like ribbons of gold, shifting with the waves outside. The ceiling soared. The windows stretched from the floor to the sky. Every room smelled of newness. Fresh paint, unslept-in air, possibility. For once, I didn't imagine my mother criticizing the layout. I didn't imagine my father inspecting the price per square foot. I didn't imagine Victoria asking which bedroom she would get. The silence inside the house felt clean. "Mine. Would you like to make an offer?" the agent asked, her voice careful. I looked out at the water, calm and endless. "Yes," I said. "Full price." Full price. No negotiations, no contingencies, no parents, no permission. The morning I moved in, the house smelled like seawater and the future. I carried only a handful of boxes, clothes, a laptop, and the one object that defined everything I had survived. My old Metro card, edges bent, color faded. The card I'd used as a child to take myself across the city alone, while Victoria was chauffeured to lessons and photo shoots. I framed it behind museum glass and hung it on the wall. Beneath it, a small plaque. From broken roots to chosen paths. Rain tapped softly against the giant windows, not like the storm that had followed me for so long, but like a rhythm, finally learning how to calm itself. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. Nathan arrived after I'd finished unpacking. He stood in the doorway, eyes wide. "You really did it," he whispered. "Yeah," I said, "I did." He wrapped his arms around me, slow and steady. No theatrics, no awe, just warmth. "I'm proud of you," he murmured. My throat tightened, not because I needed the words, but because they didn't come with conditions. That night, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the rain create gentle trails down the glass. My reflection hovered faintly, almost ghost-like, but solid enough to trust. For the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. Complete. Steady. But I should have known better. Peace never arrives without a shadow. And mine was already on its way, driving slowly past my gate in a Mercedes I knew too well. It happened on a Saturday morning that had no reason to become important. The sky outside was clear, the kind of crisp September blue that makes everything feel lighter than it is. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, turning them warm beneath my bare feet. Nathan and I were getting ready to leave for the farmer's market. His idea, not mine. He said I needed fresh berries and sunlight. I said I needed caffeine. He kissed my forehead and said, "We'll get both." I was sliding my phone into my tote bag when the screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. A Connecticut area code. My stomach tightened, the way it always did when something from the past tried clawing its way back. I almost declined. Almost. But instinct, sharp and unwelcome, made my thumb hover before pressing accept. A shaky breath came through the speaker. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 4 years. "Scarlett, it's me, Victoria." My heart tripped over itself. For a moment, all the years I'd spent building distance felt like paper walls. Thin, fragile, too easily breached. I stepped away from the kitchen island, away from Nathan's curious gaze, into the quietest corner of the room. "What do you want, Victoria?" Her voice cracked. I I just drove past your gate. Your name. It's on the entrance. Do you really live there?" Outside, the sprinkler system clicked on, sending rhythmic arcs of water across the lawn. Steady, indifferent, mocking the chaos in her voice. "What are you actually asking?" I said carefully. She inhaled sharply, a trembling sound. "How do you have that kind of money?" I didn't answer fast enough. She panicked. "I have to call Dad," she blurted, voice shaking. He needs to know." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed, my own reflection staring back at me, faint and unfamiliar. Behind me, Nathan spoke gently. "Everything okay?" I swallowed. "Not really, but it will be." He didn't press. He never did. He only slid his hand into mine, grounding me. We still went to the farmer's market, but I barely tasted the strawberry sample he fed me. I barely heard the chatter, the soft murmur of vendors, the sweetness of late summer air. My mind was already moving through old corridors I'd once locked shut. By afternoon, it began. A flood. Missed calls, voicemails, text alerts vibrating in frantic waves. Mother, father. Grandmother Hayes, Aunt Constance, numbers I had deleted but recognized instantly. Every notification came wrapped in the same thing. Desperation wearing the mask of sincerity. Mother's voicemail arrived first, her tone polished as ever, refined even when begging. "Victoria told me something unbelievable. Darling, call me immediately. She's distraught. You can't let jealousy ruin this family." Jealousy. The word tasted sour even in memory. Then came Father's message, measured, heavy, pretending balanced authority. "Scarlett, this is your father. Let's talk like adults. Whatever happened in the past, we can put it behind us. We're still family." Family. That word only appeared when they wanted something. By evening, the doorbell chimed. When I opened it, a courier stood with a cream-colored envelope. Thick paper, expensive ink, a scent of rosewater perfume, unmistakably Mother's. I closed the door before reading it. Nathan was sitting on the couch, eyes full of concern. "Do you want me to stay with you?" I shook my head. "I need to read it alone." He nodded, squeezed my shoulder, then stepped into the kitchen to make tea, the way he always did when I looked like a version of myself he wished he could protect. I sat by the window, where the last threads of golden sunlight touched the edge of the sill, and opened the envelope. Mother's handwriting stretched elegantly across the page, each letter perfectly formed, as if perfection could hide intention. The first line pretended warmth. "Victoria's expecting a baby. You'll be an aunt. Perhaps it's time to heal old wounds." My pulse slowed. There it was, the hook, covered in sugar. I kept reading. "Your father's business has hit a rough patch. The roof needs replacing. You know how expensive proper contractors can be." The walls of my chest tightened. There it was, the true reason. Victoria's pregnancy wasn't a celebration. It was leverage. The final line was a blade dipped in honey. "I know you're not a heartless person." I folded the letter once, twice, again, until the expensive paper fit neatly into the trash. The sound of it landing was louder in my mind than it should have been. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't tremble. I simply exhaled the version of myself that used to hope they would change. Later, I opened the document Dr. Callahan and I had built together. Boundaries. A list of truths. A list of lines they could no longer cross. I added a new sentence. "They don't miss me. They miss the role I used to play." 3 days later, I wrote 2 emails. The first to Mother. "If contact is to continue, the rules are simple. No financial requests, no guilt, no unannounced visits. I don't need apologies. I need respect." The second to Father. "You once called everything an investment with expected returns. Here is mine. Freedom. Let's close this account properly." Father didn't write back. He texted. Thursday, 10 a.m. The diner on Post Road. The diner smelled like bacon grease, stale coffee, and old memories. Father arrived exactly on time. Pressed suit, graying temples, the same controlled posture that used to fill rooms like a second ceiling. He sat across from me, eyes scanning, calculating. "You look different," he said. "Better or worse?" I asked. He exhaled. "Different is fine." He talked first, insisting Mother's cruelty had been misunderstood, saying I'd exaggerated, claiming I'd taken things out of context. I let him speak until he ran out of excuses. Then I leaned forward. "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said. "It was math. You invested $95,000 in appearances. I built something from nothing. The difference is honesty." He blinked, startled for a moment, a fracture in the facade. Then he looked down at his untouched coffee as the steam faded into nothing. When I stood to leave, he said quietly, almost pleading, "You don't owe us anything." I paused. That's the entire point. I walked out into the bright, indifferent sunshine. 1 week later came the gala, Connecticut's annual STEM education fundraiser. Rootwise had become a major sponsor. We were awarding scholarships to underprivileged girls, the kind of girls Mother said didn't deserve help. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and quiet wealth. The air smelled like expensive perfume and ambition. Nathan held my hand as we walked across the marble floor. "You ready?" he murmured. "Yes," I said. But I wasn't ready for what waited near the back of the room. My family. Mother in pearls. Victoria in pale silk, her pregnancy just beginning to show. Father standing stiffly behind them, the embodiment of a man rehearsing a role. They approached with smiles tailored for the crowd. Mother's voice dripped honey. "We came to support you, darling." I didn't smile. Victoria tried to speak, but her stomach lurched, and she placed a hand over her belly, a gesture too soft, too vulnerable. For a moment, she was just a woman afraid of her future. Mother continued, polished as ever. "Scarlett, true success means lifting others up. Your father's dealing with that roof situation. And Victoria..." I cut her off by turning to the event coordinator. "Excuse me," I said calmly. "I'd like to make an announcement." The coordinator nodded and handed me the envelope I'd prepared that morning. I stepped onto the stage, microphone trembling just slightly in my hand. The room hushed. "Tonight," I said, "I'm making a personal contribution, $95,000, to fund scholarships for young women told they don't deserve help." Silence. Then applause exploded through the room. Raw, thunderous, rolling like a wave crashing against every lie ever told about my worth. On the projection screen behind me, the check lit up. $95,000, Scarlett Ann Hayes, Rootwise Technologies. I looked down at my mother. Her smile cracked like porcelain dropped on marble. The applause roared on, and I walked off stage into the cool Connecticut night. Rain had started again. Thin, steady, cleansing. The kind of rain that didn't sound like sorrow anymore. The kind that sounded like truth. Rain followed me into the house that night, clinging to my hair, my coat, the fabric of the moment itself. The lights from the gala still shimmered in my mind like a distorted reflection on water, bright, sharp, impossible to forget. Nathan drove, silent but steady. He glanced at me every few minutes, the way someone watches a person carrying a fragile vase through a crowd. I wasn't fragile, not anymore. But it touched me that he cared enough to check. When we pulled into the driveway, he cut the engine and leaned back in his seat. "You okay?" he asked softly. I breathed out, feeling something inside me uncoil. Finished. He nodded like he understood the exact weight of that word. We walked inside, the house warm and golden against the storm outside. I peeled off my damp heels, feeling the cold marble under my feet. Nathan wrapped an arm around me, grounding me with a gentle squeeze. He didn't say, "I'm proud of you," though he could have. He didn't say, "They deserve that," though they did. He simply kissed my temple and whispered, "You're safe." That was always enough. What I didn't expect came the next morning. Not from them, but from me. The house was quiet except for the sound of the waves brushing the shoreline in long, soft breaths. Mist hung over the water, turning the world into a pale, blurred watercolor. I stood on the deck barefoot with a mug of coffee warming my hands. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. Almost unnervingly so. Inside, Nathan was making breakfast. Oatmeal with blueberries. His go-to for restorative mornings. He called out, "Tea or coffee?" "Coffee," I answered. When I didn't walk inside, he came out, standing behind me, his hand sliding around my waist. "You're thinking too loudly," he teased, his chin resting on my shoulder. "I'm not thinking at all," I said. It was the truth. For the first time, my mind wasn't racing, calculating, preparing. It was quiet. And yet, something hovered at the edge of that silence, a realization, a truth I had avoided for too long. When you spend your whole life surviving, you forget to examine the wounds once you stop bleeding. Later, after Nathan left for work, I found myself drifting toward my office. The room was still, a sanctuary of glass and open space. The frame with my Metro card hung on the wall, small and unassuming, but powerful in the way a scar is powerful, permanent, proof. I crossed the room, opened my journal, the one from therapy, and turned to a blank page. I didn't plan what to write. The words simply arrived. They taught me love had to be earned. I learned that peace doesn't. I sat back, staring at the sentence, the ink still wet. It didn't feel profound. It felt true. I closed the journal gently, like sealing a confession. That week, I heard nothing from my parents. The silence was eerie at first, unnatural, like the quiet just before a storm breaks open again. I braced for manipulation, guilt, a barrage of messages disguised as olive branches. But nothing came. And that nothingness wrapped around me like a soft blanket. No demands, no expectations, no weight. Was this what freedom tasted like? One night, as Nathan and I were chopping vegetables together, he said, "You seem different." Lighter. I knew that's what he meant. He just didn't say it. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. "Just finished," I repeated. His eyes softened. "Not everyone gets to finish." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm not wasting it." 2 days later, I got an email from the gala organizers. Subject: press coverage. Pending approval. They wanted my permission to release photos of my donation ceremony to the local press. A perfectly reasonable request. But seeing myself on stage, frozen in time, holding the microphone with steady hands, looking directly at my mother as the entire room applauded, felt surreal. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like clarity made visible. A quiet kind of justice. I approved the photos, not out of spite, but out of truth. If young girls heard that someone who was told she didn't deserve help built a company and donated $95,000 to others like her, then yes, that deserved to be known. Nathan kissed me when I told him. Not passionately, not theatrically, just gently, like he was kissing a bruise that had finally stopped hurting. And then something unexpected happened. Not from my family. From me. I started sleeping through the night. I started waking without dread. I started cooking again. I started taking weekends off. I started saying no without guilt. One evening, standing by the windows with a glass of wine, I realized something startling. I didn't want them to apologize anymore, because I didn't want anything from them at all. Forgiveness wasn't required for me to move on. Closure wasn't something they could offer, and I didn't want the version of love they knew how to give. Love that needed performance. Love that needed usefulness. Love that needed hierarchy. Love that was never love at all. A week later, during a company meeting, a storm rolled in. Rain beat against the windows of our boardroom with a wild intensity. The storm reminded me of myself, the girl I used to be, the storm I had walked through. As the team discussed projections, campaigns, upcoming initiatives, I drifted for a moment, lost in the sound of the rain. It didn't sound like fear anymore. It didn't sound like the night I walked away from that dinner table. It sounded like something else entirely. Growth, possibility, proof. And in that moment, something inside me settled with a quiet finality. You can rebuild a life, but sometimes the real victory is rebuilding the sound of rain. The breaking point and the breaking free had happened at the gala. Now came the aftermath. The clean break, the quiet rebuilding, the settling dust. My parents didn't write back. Not that week, not the next. Not even when the press quietly circulated the photo of me holding the $95,000 scholarship check. Every post about Rootwise, every headline, every shared article. Nothing. Their silence no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like closure delivered by the universe itself. The wound was finally, irrevocably, beautifully closed. But the story wasn't finished. I had one last part left to live. And it wasn't about them anymore. The last morning of September arrived soft and pale, the kind of morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. Mist clung to the surface of Long Island Sound, blurring the line between water and sky until they looked like two mirrors, reflecting the same quiet truth. I stood barefoot on the deck, the wood cold beneath my feet. My coffee steamed gently against the chilled air. Inside, the house hummed with the faint, familiar warmth that had begun to feel like something I never dared to hope for. Home. Not the place I grew up in, not the place I once begged to belong to, but a home built from my own hands, my own choices, my own silence reclaimed. Behind me, the sliding door whispered open. "Morning," Nathan said, voice still soft from sleep. I didn't turn around. "Morning." He came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. An anchor without weight, a comfort without strings. "You're up early," he murmured. I couldn't sleep. "You're not upset, are you?" "No," I said, and surprised myself with the certainty in my voice. "Not upset, just awake." He kissed my cheek. "That's allowed." We stood like that for a long moment, the world quiet except for the soft lap of waves against the shore and the low, distant rumble of a boat engine somewhere across the water. Eventually, Nathan squeezed my hand and went inside to make breakfast. I stayed a little longer, staring at the horizon that had once felt impossibly far away. Now it felt exactly where I belonged. After breakfast, when Nathan left for work, I went to my office. The sunlight filtered in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, hitting the glass frame on the wall. My Metro card, faded, bent, a relic of the girl who rode the subway alone while her sister was chauffeured across town. I touched the glass lightly. That girl had carried herself through tunnels, storms, code, coffee shifts, and empty recognition. She had built herself from rejected scraps and secondhand praise. She had survived 1,000 small silences. And she had done it all without a single hand reaching back to help her. Now she stood here, older, steadier, unbroken. I sat at my desk and opened my journal, the one I'd started the night my parents told me I didn't deserve help. The final page waited like an unopened letter. I wrote slowly, deliberately, the words steady as ink. They once measured my worth by what I could offer them. Now I measure my peace by everything I no longer owe. The pen stilled. The waves continued their soft rhythm outside. In the distance, a heron lifted off the shoreline. Slow, elegant strokes of its wings, slicing through the morning fog. It moved with intention, not urgency. Grace without rush. Certainty without noise. I watched until it disappeared into the haze. Later that afternoon, I sat with Nathan on the couch. He leaned against me with his head on my shoulder, our legs tangled under a shared blanket. The TV played something neither of us was really watching. He traced slow circles on my arm. Talk to me. About what? About what happens now. I exhaled. Now, nothing happens. He shifted to look at me. Nothing? For the first time, I said, that feels like everything. He smiled the way he always did when he understood me better than I expected. You don't have to be strong anymore, he whispered. I'm not being strong, I said. I'm being free. And I meant it. Deeply. Finally. The kind of freedom that isn't a rebellion, or a declaration, or a performance. The kind of freedom that comes when the war ends, not because one side won, but because you chose to stop fighting. Because you walked away. Because you learned that survival wasn't the end goal. Living was. That night, I walked through the house, turning off lights room by room. The sound of rain began again. Soft at first, like the gentle tapping of fingertips against glass. I paused by the windows. Rain had been the soundtrack of so many chapters of my life. The night I left that dinner table. The night I built my first blueprint. The night I bought this house. The night Victoria called from my gate. Rain had always been tied to endings. But now it sounded like beginnings. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, the reflections of distant lights smearing across my vision like streaks of silver. The rain didn't sound like abandonment anymore, or grief, or loneliness, or all the words I used to swallow because speaking them felt dangerous. Now the rain sounded like proof. Proof that storms can pass. Proof that silence can heal. Proof that the people who walk away from you can no longer control what you build after they're gone. Proof that distance is not punishment. It's protection. And I had protected myself, finally. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm I'd never known before. Rootwise thrived without me needing to bleed for every success. Nathan began spending more nights here, quietly folding himself into the edges of my routines. My sleep became deeper, my mornings lighter, my shoulders looser. No calls came from my parents, not even after the gala photos circulated, not after the scholarship announcement reached every local publication, not after the whispers of Scarlet Hayes, self-made CEO, floated through circles that once pretended I didn't exist. Whether they stayed silent out of pride, shame, denial, or calculation, it didn't matter, because their silence no longer defined me. Their absence no longer shattered me. Their approval no longer tempted me. And their voices, those once thundering, all-powerful voices, no longer lived inside my head. I had replaced them with my own. Quiet, steady, certain. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house glowed warm with golden hour light, Nathan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. Thinking again? He asked. No, I said, smiling, just being. Feels good? It feels earned. I rested my head against his chest, his heartbeat steady and real beneath my ear. For a long time, I never believed I could have a life without pain, stitched into every seam. A life built on choice rather than fear. A life shaped by peace rather than performance. But here it was, quiet, warm, mine. Completely mine. I looked out at the rain-washed glass, the ocean stretching out into evening blue, and whispered the truth that had taken me years to learn. Some stories don't end with forgiveness, I said softly. Some end with freedom. Nathan kissed the top of my head. And this one? He asked. This one ends right here, I said, with me. The waves outside shimmered in the last light of day. The rain eased into a soft, steady hush, and I closed my eyes, letting the life I chose settle around me like a second skin. A skin that finally fit,